Hello, I'm James Sproule, the Chief Economist here at the Institute of Directors. The very first one we're going to make this year is something we've been talking about a lot recently, and that's UK wages. What's happened to UK wages? Well, one of the things that we know for certain is that UK wages have been pretty stagnant for the last few years, and we're actually predicting that they're going to be starting to rise. We're predicting they're starting to rise on two things. One, we've done an extensive survey of what our members think they're going to be paying over the next year, and the majority of them are actually planning on wage rises coming up. So that's very, very good news for the consumer, very good news for workers. With continuing corporate profits looking good, I think this is affordable, and I think the key to all of this is that these wage rises are actually locked into corporate performance, which means, of course, that the companies remain competitive and the workers are benefiting from the fact that companies are remaining competitive. So I think it's very, very good news. It's probably not as high as people would like, between 2 and 3%, but that really does mean it's sustainable. That's the sort of thing that I think if we continue with this, it leaves the UK economy in a very, very good position in the longer term. Moving on to UK interest rates are now at 0.5%, which is as low as they've been since the Bank of England was founded back in the 17th century. We're expecting them to remain very, very low for the first half of the year, largely because there's a number of big storm clouds out there on the horizon, which the Bank of England seems to be particularly cautious about. The IOD's own view is that interest rates should have started to rise actually in the summer of 2014. We base that upon the view that we think that the economy is now strong enough to actually take some normalization of interest rates, and we'd like to see monetary policy being able to work, and that means interest rates rising to nothing heroic, but between 2 and 3% by sometime in 2017. Turning to UK infrastructure, there are a couple of big infrastructure projects out there, of course. The biggest one is HS2. HS2 is one of those projects, like many infrastructure projects, where the initial view of how much it's going to cost has been scrapped, and a new figure's come through, much, much higher than anybody expected. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem that the benefits are really there in the sort of scale that people would want. Moreover, the reason for HS2 continually seems to change. With all of that in mind, we of course have a general election in May of this year. Our view is that an incoming government, if there is a change of government, may well decide that they don't get enough personal credit for this. They may well decide that they're able to blame their predecessors for profligacy, and the result is that they scrap HS2. Bit of a long shot on this one, may not come to pass, but actually there's a big danger that HS2 would be scrapped if there were a change of government. The next prediction is about European quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is what we call is when the central bank of a country buys government bonds up from the banks. The result is that money is put into those banks, and the idea being that the banks then lend the money onwards because they've got so much on their balance sheets. The Eurozone has resisted quantitative easing for a number of reasons. Obviously, the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve in the US have both done that. It's been about 25% of GDP in both of those countries, and we're looking at something similar coming through from the European Union. That means about 3 trillion euros worth of quantitative easing. Unfortunately, I think it'll have a mild stimulus effect in the short term, but won't really make all that much difference in the longer term. Two reasons for not making actually the big difference that Europe might like is, first of all, they're likely to double count a lot of the money. So of that 3 trillion, which is anybody's books, a large amount of money, there'll be a lot of double counting. A lot of that money will have already been committed, so the number will look good, but in fact, the actual impact will be less. And secondly, there's every possibility that a lot of the money will be steered towards politically expedient projects, as opposed to those that deliver the best value for money. So what we'll see, unfortunately, has been well established in the past, is a political interference in the system which results in suboptimal investments, and I fear that will be the same thing here. So there's a stimulus while the investment is actually taking place, but it doesn't actually trigger the broader, longer-term growth that we would be looking for in Europe. Finally, keeping on the European theme, the Eurozone is going to avoid deflation, but it's really only technical. Deflation, of course, is when prices fall. Lots of reasons for that. People looking at it saying, why are we having deflation? Our view is that the biggest reason for deflation is actually a failing of consumer confidence. And it's a widespread failure of that consumer confidence. And when you have the consumer confidence knocked in that way, what we tend to find is that people delay decisions about when they're going to buy things, and they tend to sit on their hands a lot, and they don't go on spending. That type of thing is becoming increasingly common across much of the Eurozone. And the more that you have deflation, the more that you have loss of consumer confidence, the more that you have deflation. Now, it's unlikely that the price level actually does dip below, and therefore we're still looking for very, very modest inflation, but it's going to be very close to zero. And if the Eurozone plays it wrong on, say, for instance, a renewed Eurozone crisis, it could actually trip over into full-blown deflation.